So for this I wanted to do kind of a different video, a little bit off the beaten path and a little more into how I ended up with getting one of these cars over any other Mustang that I could have bought, or specifically the Shelby GT350, which I mentioned in the title. Came down to a lot of factors, and this all started 2 years ago when I decided that I wanted to get another Mustang in general. And when that happened, I knew that I didn't want to get just a GT or anything like that. I wanted something a little bit different, a little bit special. So that kind of really narrowed it down as far as what I was looking for. And originally I wanted to get a Terminator Cobra, but I went through a small phase within that 2-year time frame of where I really considered getting a Shelby GT350. And actually I saw a post on the SVTP forums recently where someone asking the same exact question. They were debating between buying one of these or getting a Shelby GT350. And of course you get opinions all over the place. Everyone's personal preference and experience with each different car varies from person to person. And I've ran into the same thing when I asked the same questions as well when I was back and forth on what I wanted to do. And I realized that what I ultimately had to do was it needed to be my own decision, and I had to determine what was I going to be doing with the car, what kind of content did I want to make for the car with the channel, and that's how I came up with this list that I've had for about 2 years now. Well, not quite 2, but pretty close to it. This is a pros and cons list for each car, and in the end, this had a lot to do with what I decided to end up buying. It wasn't solely based on this list, but it really got me focused in thinking of really what I wanted to do with the car and what I ultimately really wanted to buy, because this was a one-time shot. I wasn't going to buy a Terminator or buy a GT350 and I want to be put in the situation where I regretted it a couple months later, where it's like, damn, you know, I should have bought the other one. So I used this list to try to get me down that path and make sure it was really what I wanted to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all the pros and cons personally for me when it came to buying one of these, or when it came to buying the Shelby. I'm going to start with the cons for buying a Terminator, then I'll do the cons for the Shelby, then I'll do the pros for each one. When I finished this list, I ended up with 9 pros and 4 cons with the Terminator. With the GT350, I ended up with 6 pros and 6 cons. So I had more cons and less pros with the Shelby than I did with the Cobra. So I'm going to start with the cons for the Terminator, and then we'll move on from there. Number 1, and these aren't listed in any particular order, they're just how I have them on the list. No warranty on a Cobra. It's an older car, 16, 17 years old at the time of this filming. No more warranties or anything like that. Maybe if you buy secondary from a dealership, maybe you'll get like a 30-day warranty, but that's about the only time you're gonna run into something like that. Financing, huge problem with these cars. I actually did a video on this, why financing on these is so hard, and steps you can take to try to make that process a little bit easier, and I'll link that up above, and I'll also put it down in the description too. Another con, 3 out of the 4, is the simple interior. I had a 94 Cobra, a 95 GT, and a 94 V6, and this 2004. The interior in all of them was exactly the same. There isn't anything different about this versus my 94 Cobra other than the functions for like the traction control and that those 30 buttons that are down below on the center console. That's different, but as far as the interior layout goes, all the hard plastic, just the general how the interior is, it's remained unchanged, and it's very simple, broken down, bare bones, basic. So I had to list that as a con for one of these cars. And kind of tied into that a little bit, it has more to do generally with the age of the car, is its outdated technology. It does have some stuff in here that is modern for its time, but when you jump ahead by 17 years and 16 years, it's very very tech outdated. At the time, the IRS was revolutionary and groundbreaking to put into one of these cars. Now it's commonplace. The IRS didn't show up again as far as regular production in Mustangs for years down the road. That's one of the things about this car, is you're not going to get a lot of tech built into this at all. So that's the 4 cons with the Cobra, and we'll move on to the cons with the Shelby GT350. Starting out is the initial cost. These cars start at about mid $60,000 range, depending on the package that you get and dealer markup and all that stuff. I wasn't going to buy new, that wasn't my intention. I was going to buy one that was a year or two old, probably for like around the $40,000 to $45,000 price range is what I was hopefully looking for. Cheaper, obviously better, but the initial cost to get into one versus one of these was a lot steeper. Also tied into that is the cost of ownership. The maintenance on this is fairly cheap. You can do a lot of it yourself. I plan on doing a lot of the maintenance on this myself, versus the Shelby. Everything is more expensive for it because it's newer. Buy an oil filter for this versus an oil filter for a 350. There's obviously a price difference in that, and a lot of the other just simple stuff that will add up more over time. The other issue that I had with getting the Shelby was there's really not much to mod on it. They're extremely well built from the factory, which is awesome, but there's not a lot you can really do to it. You can throw a Whipple on it or other kinds of force induction, nitrous, something like that. But short of that, there's not a lot you can really do. There could be some more suspension stuff you could do to make it a little bit better, but it's already so good from the dealership with the MagnaRide and the suspension setup that's in it. There's really not a lot you can do with that. So that was, it can be a good or a bad thing. I wanted to get into another Mustang with the intent of being able to mod it and do things with it. And with the Shelby, I was missing out on that. That's something that I wouldn't have been able to do as much with it. And speaking of less to do with it, less YouTube content, I haven't had any issues with coming up with videos to do this for this car. I have a lot more planned for it, and even when it's up for the winter, there's a lot of stuff I have planned for it. With the Shelby, it would have been quite a bit different. There's not as much content that I could really think of doing with it. So you have the car, and then if you're not going to mod it, what's really to do for content? I guess if you were going to road race it a lot, you would be able to have a lot of content doing that. But so the modability for the Cobra was a lot more. And even if I got one modded, they still wouldn't have been modded the way that I wanted. There still would have been things that I changed. And speaking of tracking the car for the Shelby, you could do a lot of content with that, but that's like the only place you can really use the car to its full potential is the track. And with these, you can do, they're built more for straight line speed. You can build one to be a street monster, to do straight line hard pulls with it if that's what you want to build it for. With the Shelby, it's not quite the same. You can go fast in a straight line, but that's not what it's really built for. It's meant as a corner carving car, built for awesome handling and that kind of stuff. And I don't live in an area where I can drive on conditions like that all the time. There's definitely places I can go to, places that I'm going to with this to do the same kind of thing, but I don't feel as though it would really ever push the car to its full potential and really get the most use out of it is what I could really do with this, where you can build it, just have tons of power, tons of straight line speed, and be able to use that virtually anywhere at any point and have a lot of fun doing it. And this is kind of the last point for the cons, was the cost of maintenance, where it ties into with the initial costs and everything else. It would be more to maintain one of those cars than it is this. Next I'll do the pros for the Shelby, and then we'll do all the pros for the Cobra, since that was the leading category for what made me decide to want to get this. The pros for the Shelby start with the current tech. Far more tech built into that car versus one of these. That's self-explanatory. I really don't have to get into all the minute details of all the tech built into a brand new 2020 GT350 compared to one of these. The much improved interior, and not just the how comfortable it is, but also just the entire layout is so much better, a lot more modern and updated. It just looks better, it feels better, far more comfortable. So that was a huge factor versus something of this age. The outstanding suspension, you can't, if you build this to be a road car with all the best road racing suspension that you can put into this thing, it will never touch a Shelby GT350. It's not built for it. That car was specifically built for that type of driving, that type of racing. This was not. You can make these handle really well considering what it is, but its age and everything else are always going to be a factor that's going to keep it back from being what the more modern current car is going to be able to do. The high revving V8, that VOODOO engine, it just blows my mind how awesome that engine is for them. So the engine itself was a definite plus. I mean, having something that revs to over 8,000 RPMs with the tech built into that, and that crankshaft that's in there, that flat plane crank, I mean, that's just, this redlines thousands of RPMs lower than what the Shelby does. This is fun in its own right, but the Shelby is an entirely different animal. And the last pro for the Shelby would be the warranty. It's hard to beat a car with a no warranty. It's just, you don't have to worry about replacing a lot of stuff. And when I mentioned the maintenance as being a con, yes, if something breaks on the Shelby, it's under warranty, it doesn't cost you anything. But eventually when that warranty runs out and you have to replace parts on it, those parts are going to be a lot more expensive than parts for this overall. So the last category, and for the entire list, and for the Cobra, is the pros for the Cobra. Forced induction, right from the factory. You don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of cash to supercharge one of these like you do a 350. It's already supercharged, don't have to worry about it. You can do a bigger blower, but even with that, that's much cheaper than putting a Whipple on a 350. The upfront cost is a lot more versus something that already has a supercharger on it versus one that doesn't. The next thing is the cost of ownership. I've covered that for the pros and cons for both. It's just cheaper to own one of these overall. Also tied into that is like insurance and stuff like that. Insurance is a big thing with cost of ownership. I'm paying $465 a year on this with a declared value of $30,000. I'm paying more on my 2016 F-150 than I am with this thing, and getting that kind of insurance on a brand new Shelby, you're not going to find that. The extensive mod list on this, if you get one that's fully built or not fully built, you can turn it into whatever you want, or you can build it from the ground up if it's completely stock. It's just a blank canvas of whatever you want to do with it, whether you want to make it more suspension road race oriented, which this one was originally built for, or if you want to make it a complete straight line drag racing monster or anything like that. It's completely up to you, whatever direction you want to go with it. It's just a lot of stuff you can do with these. The aftermarket for these is massive. Yeah, they're getting close to 20 years old at this point. There's still plenty of mods for the Fox Body 5.0s. So the mods for these they're out there. If you want to mod something on this car, someone's made a part for it and made a better one than stock. So it's just a lot better overall. The rarity factor of this, the Shelbys have been made a lot more years, 2016 or 2020. That's twice as long as this car as far as years ago. And within that time frame, I haven't looked up the numbers for the Shelbys, but they made just under 20,000 of these total. They have made a lot of Shelby GT350s. There's a lot more of those running around. Not that they're not special, not that they're not rare in their own right, they're just not as rare as these cars are. And even with the production number of these being under 20,000, there's even less than that running around now after all these years, with ones being parted out, ones that were wrecked. so there's just not as many of these running around. I wanted something that stood out a little bit more, something that was not something you're not going to see. You go to a Ford dealership, of course there's Shelby's there, they're brand new. You'll never see one of these used on a Ford dealership, extremely rare occasion. You go to a car show, you're a lot more likely to see a GT500 and a GT350 than you are one of these, unless it's a big national show. More YouTube content. I cover this with the cons. For the Shelby is the exact opposite with this. I have no shortage of content for the foreseeable future with this. I'm going to keep modding it. I'm going to keep doing videos on it, whether it's ones like this or in-car stuff, or I have other things planned that will be coming up in the next couple of months for different types of videos. I want to try and keep the variety different on this channel. I don't want it to be the same kind of video every single time. Last thing for a pro for this car is the Root supercharger whine. As awesome as the Shelby sounds revving out to 8,000 plus RPMs, you cannot beat the sound of these cars when they're under boost and that supercharger is screaming. Put a smaller pulley on these or an aftermarket blower, being either a Whipple, Kenny Bell, VMP. You can't beat that sound. It's just, I don't care. I don't care about the VOODOO, its tech, all that, when you compare it to how these cars sound. It's just, and it's not just the supercharger sound. I think these sound better in general. This exhaust system I have in this car, I've done videos on that. I can link that up top as well and in the description. This sounds better than a GT350 in my opinion. It just sounds better. It's got that deep, throaty rumble, growl to it, and that's personally what I like a lot more. Someone else may not, that's perfectly fine, but for what I wanted, it's what I like more. I've heard plenty of sound clips of the 350s. Admittedly, I haven't heard one in person, but I hadn't heard a lot of Cobras in person either. But I just like the sounds of these cars better. And supercharger whine, it's amazing. In my opinion, you can't beat it. I love it. So that's it, guys. I hope you liked a different kind of path for this video. I want to do something a little bit different. But if you're new here, sub to the channel. If you like the video, throw it a like. Like I said in all the other videos, a lot more content coming, a lot of stuff planned with this car in particular. So with all that said, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.